My brothers and sisters, there comes a time in every believer's life when God looks at us right in the middle of our plans, our comforts, our relationships, and says, let it go. Now, that's not an easy word, because letting go means trusting God enough to release something you thought you needed, something you thought you couldn't live without. But God knows what you don't. He sees what's coming, and he loves you too much to let you hold on to what's holding you back. Letting go requires trust. That's a truth that sounds simple on the surface, but when life makes it personal, when God puts his finger on something in your life and says, it's time to release it, you begin to understand how deeply trust is connected to surrender. Trusting God when he says to let go means giving up your need for answers, your grasp on control, and your desire for comfort. It's a spiritual risk that invites divine reward. Letting go becomes difficult when the thing God is asking you to release is something you've built your identity around. Maybe it's a relationship that once brought you joy, but now it brings confusion, pain, and spiritual conflict. Maybe it's a job that gave you security, but now you feel drained and disconnected. Maybe it's a habit, a mindset, or even a plan that you crafted with good intentions, and now here comes the Lord saying, lay it down. It doesn't feel logical. It doesn't feel fair, but it is God. Trusting God in this way demands that you believe in his character more than your circumstances. You have to believe that he is good even when the road ahead looks uncertain. You must believe that he sees the entire picture while you only see a piece. And you must believe that he's more committed to your destiny than you are. Trust is not about blind obedience. It's about relational confidence. It's saying, God, I may not understand what you're doing, but I trust who you are. One of the reasons we struggle to let go is because we've grown comfortable. Familiarity can become a spiritual trap. The children of Israel longed to return to Egypt, not because it was good, but because it was familiar. That's how bondage works. It tricks you into believing that what's behind you is safer than what's ahead. But God doesn't call you to safety, he calls you to purpose. And purpose requires movement. Trusting God when he says let go means you must be willing to let your hands be empty before they can be filled. God won't compete for space in your life. He waits for you to release what's been taking up room. As long as you hold on to what God told you to release, you remain closed off to what he's trying to give you. And God never calls you to give up something unless he plans to replace it with something greater, something more aligned with his will for your life. There's a spiritual transaction that happens when you let go in faith. It's not just about giving something up, it's about positioning yourself to receive. Think of Abraham on the mountain, raising the knife over Isaac. That was not just a test of obedience, it was a test of trust. God wanted to see if Abraham would hold on to the gift more than the giver. And when Abraham proved that God was first, the ram appeared. The provision was always there. But it was only revealed after Abraham trusted enough to surrender. Trusting God when he says to let go also means trusting his timing. We often want to know what's next before we take the first step, but God doesn't work on our schedule. He doesn't give us all the details up front. He leads step by step, and each act of obedience unlocks the next level of clarity. If you wait until everything makes sense, you'll miss the blessing that only comes through faith. And yes, trust is risky. It means stepping into the unknown with nothing but a word from God. But that's exactly where the supernatural happens. The miracle is often on the other side of your willingness to walk away from what's no longer God's will for your life. Letting go doesn't always feel spiritual. Sometimes it feels like grief. Sometimes it feels like fear. But even in the midst of those emotions, trust says, Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. God is not asking you to let go to take something from you. He's asking you to let go so he can lead you to something better. But you can't receive it with clenched fists. You have to open your hands and say, God, I trust you. Even if I don't know how this ends, I know who you are. I know you are faithful. I know you are for me. I know you don't make mistakes. Letting go isn't weakness. It's worship. And worship rooted in trust will always lead to greater intimacy with the one who knows the way. When God speaks, he rarely gives the full picture. More often than not, he gives a command without an explanation, a direction without the destination. That's where faith comes alive, when obedience is required before clarity is given. God does not operate on the human timeline of understanding. He is not obligated to show you the whole plan before he expects you to move. He simply says go and waits to see if you trust him enough to walk in obedience without all the answers. We see this truth clearly in the life of Abraham. In Genesis 12, God tells him, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. God didn't hand Abraham a map. He didn't outline the journey or guarantee comfort. He simply said, go. Abraham's job was not to understand, it was to obey. And that's what faith looks like. Moving before the why is revealed. This kind of obedience is not easy. Human nature craves details. We want the full picture before we take the first step. We want the contract in hand, the security lined up, and the path cleared before we move. But God doesn't work that way, because if he gave you every detail in advance, you'd never learn to trust him. You'd trust the plan, not the planner. And God desires relationship, not just result. He wants to develop your character, not just deliver your dreams. When God says let go and tells you to move in a new direction, he may not tell you where you're going, how long it will take, or what it will cost. All you'll have is a word, a divine instruction. And that word is enough if your trust is in the one who spoke it. Obedience must come first, because it is in the act of obedience that God reveals the next step. Clarity is progressive. It unfolds as you walk by faith. Some of the most powerful moves of God begin with the simplest steps of obedience. Noah built an ark without ever seeing rain. Moses lifted a staff over the sea before it split. Joshua marched around a wall that didn't move until the seventh day. Each of them had to obey first. There was no guarantee, no proof, no evidence, just a word from God. And that word was enough. In our modern world, we've become addicted to certainty. We want God to work like GPS, giving turn-by-turn instructions. But he operates more like a compass, pointing you in the direction of your purpose and expecting you to walk it out in faith. He's not interested in giving you a comfortable life. He's interested in growing your trust. And trust only grows in the unknown. This is why so many people stay stuck, because they're waiting for a perfect plan instead of walking in present obedience. But delayed obedience is disobedience. And when you delay, you risk missing divine timing. God's instructions are not random. They're aligned with a perfect season. When he says move, it's because the moment is ripe. And if you hesitate, you may miss what he prepared for you in that exact window. Obedience first doesn't mean you walk blindly. It means you walk boldly. You don't need to know every step, just the first one. And once you take that step, God meets you there. He doesn't reveal the entire staircase, but he will always show you the next step when you're faithful with the one in front of you. Too often, people wait until they feel ready. But God isn't waiting on your feelings. He's waiting on your faith. Feelings are unreliable. Faith is anchored. Feelings waver. Faith remains. When God says go, when he tells you to let go, he's not asking you to feel ready. He's asking you to believe that he is ready, ready to lead, ready to provide, ready to carry you into the next chapter of your life. So obedience must become your priority even when understanding is absent. God sees what you don't. He knows what lies ahead. And every act of obedience positions you for the next revelation. But if you demand clarity before obedience, you may never move. And if you never move, you'll never see what God intended for you. This is the difference between walking by sight and walking by faith. Sight waits for evidence. Faith trusts the voice. Sight demands facts. Faith responds to truth. When God says, let go, he's not trying to confuse you. He's trying to see if you trust him more than you trust your own understanding. And so the question is not, do you know the way? The question is, do you trust the one who does? Because when God speaks, the power is not in the details, it's in the obedience. And when you obey first, clarity will always follow. There's a reason why letting go is so hard. It often feels like losing control. But what we fail to realize is that sometimes the very thing we are holding on to for dear life is the very thing that's holding us back. In our human understanding, we assume that holding on equals strength, that endurance means clinging tighter. But in the kingdom of God, strength is often revealed through surrender. True growth, true transformation, true forward movement happens when we release what's no longer part of our divine assignment. There are seasons where the blessing of yesterday becomes the burden of today. What once served a purpose is now stunting your progress. A relationship that once brought peace now brings confusion. A job that once gave you purpose now only brings anxiety. A mindset that once helped you survive is now keeping you from thriving. The issue is not that these things were wrong from the start. Is that they're no longer right for where God is taking you next. And if you're unwilling to let go, you risk carrying dead weight into a season that requires full capacity. When God says let go, it's not just about separating from something outside of you. It's about separating from what's sabotaging the work of God inside of you. Sometimes it's not the people, the job, or the environment that's the issue. It's the internal attachments, the fear, the pride, the need for approval that are silently anchoring you to a place you should have already left. God isn't just trying to change your surroundings, he's trying to change you. And change never happens without release. Jesus told his disciples in John 15 that every branch in him that bears fruit will be pruned so that it can bear more fruit. That means God cuts back what is good so that something greater can grow. And here's the part we don't like. Pruning feels like loss, but it's not destruction, it's preparation. God isn't punishing you when he asks you to let go. He's making space. He's removing the excess, the distractions, the false dependencies that keep you from walking in full maturity. What you're holding on to might have value, but that doesn't mean it's part of your future. The truth is, holding on can be a sign of fear, fear of the unknown, fear of regret, fear of scarcity. We tell ourselves, what if I never get this chance again? What if I can't find anything better? What if I let go and end up with nothing? But those questions are rooted in a belief that God can't or won't provide. And when you live with that belief, you begin to make decisions from a place of survival rather than faith. That kind of mindset will trap you in cycles of delay. You can't walk in the fullness of God's promise if you're still clinging to yesterday's provision. We often romanticize the past because it's known. Even if it was painful, at least we understood it. But the problem with that thinking is that it keeps us loyal to limitations. God wants to stretch your faith, elevate your vision, and lead you into the unknown, not so you can be afraid, but so you can be free. And that freedom begins the moment you loosen your grip. Letting go is not a sign of failure. It's a sign of alignment. It's saying, God, I trust your plan more than I trust my preference. It's acknowledging that your own efforts, while well-intentioned, cannot compare to the outcomes God can bring through your surrender. The only thing worse than letting go of something God never meant for you is staying attached and missing what he was trying to release into your life. We say we want peace, joy, and breakthrough, but often we don't realize that those things require space. God will not pour fresh oil into a vessel already full of yesterday's residue. He's not going to bless clutter. If your heart is divided, if your life is overwhelmed with attachments he didn't authorize, you won't have the capacity to hold what he's trying to send. Sometimes the delay is not because God is holding it back, it's because we're too full to receive it. So letting go is not loss, it's positioning. It's alignment. It's trusting that what God wants to bring is far greater than what you're afraid to release. And until you let it go, you'll never know what you could have gained. You'll never know the peace that comes from obedience. You'll never know the joy that comes from freedom. And you'll never know the blessing that's waiting on the other side of surrender. It's time to stop carrying what God never told you to keep. It's time to let go, not because you're weak, but because you're finally strong enough to trust him more than your own grip. Letting go doesn't mean you're giving up. It means you're growing up. And what God has next is worth every step of faith it takes to release what's behind. God is not a God of waste, but he is a God of order. And in his divine order, there's a principle that we often overlook. He will not fill what is already full. When your hands are occupied with what he did not assign, when your heart is cluttered with what no longer serves your purpose, there is no room left for him to deposit what's next. That's why letting go is not just a test of faith. It's a prerequisite for overflow. If you want God to move in your life in a fresh and powerful way, you must first create space. We pray for new blessings, new direction, new favor, but we try to receive those things with lives already packed with distractions, idols, fear, and outdated assignments. We want God to give us something fresh, but we're unwilling to release what's stale. And he won't compete. God doesn't force his presence into spaces that are already occupied. If your spirit is filled with doubt, bitterness, pride, or worldly attachments, there's no room for him to pour in the peace, the clarity, the provision you've been asking for. Sometimes we unknowingly block the blessing by refusing to declutter. And this isn't just about material possessions. It's about spiritual posture. You can't hold on to unforgiveness and expect the fullness of God's joy. You can't cling to fear and expect the peace that surpasses all understanding. You can't continue to chase after what people think and then wonder why you can't hear what God is saying. The posture of a vessel ready to be filled is one of surrender and emptiness. God fills empty vessels. He fills yielded hearts. He fills open hands. There's a moment in the story of the widow in 2 Kings 4 that illustrates this perfectly. She was in desperate need, facing debt and the possibility of losing her sons. The prophet Elisha told her to gather as many empty vessels as she could find. Not full ones, empty ones. Because the oil would only flow where there was room. And as long as she kept bringing empty vessels, the oil kept flowing. But when there were no more empty vessels, the oil stopped. That's the principle. The flow of God's provision will stop when there is no room left to receive it. We ask God to give us more opportunity, more wisdom, more anointing. But what if the blockage isn't in his giving, but in our capacity to receive? What if the problem isn't his silence, but our saturation? If your heart is filled with your own agenda, there's no space for his. If your schedule is filled with distractions, there's no time for his voice. If your identity is wrapped up in people's validation, you'll miss the security that comes from his affirmation. Letting go is how you make room. It's the divine reset that clears the clutter and prepares your life to receive. It's not easy. You may have to release relationships that comfort your ego but starve your spirit. You may have to walk away from environments that feel familiar but feed your dysfunction. You may have to lay down habits and thought patterns that once helped you survive but now hinder your growth. Letting go is painful, but it's also freeing. And freedom is fertile ground for the miraculous. We often try to negotiate with God. Can I keep this and still be blessed? Can I hold on to this while you work? But God doesn't bless compromise. He blesses obedience. And obedience sometimes requires subtraction before multiplication. Before he fed the 5,000, Jesus asked the disciples to bring what they had and place it in his hands. The miracle didn't start until they released it. And the same is true for us. As long as we're clutching tightly to what we think we need, we'll never know what he's capable of doing with empty, surrendered hands. When your heart is emptied of distractions, when your mind is cleared of fear, when your life is stripped of things not rooted in his will, God begins to pour. And what he pours is always more than what you lost. But it starts with space. It starts with an honest evaluation. What am I holding on to that's taking up the room meant for God? Because whatever that is, it's not worth what you're missing. You were not created to be filled with fear, anxiety, pride, or past pain. You were created to be filled with power, love, and a sound mind. If you want to see God do something new, you must prepare a place for it. And that preparation begins with letting go. Emptiness in the hands of a submitted believer is not a weakness. It's a setup. It's an invitation for the supernatural. So stop trying to fill yourself with things that never satisfy. Let go, open up, and make room, because God will not fill what is already full. But if you come to him empty, he will pour out more than you can contain. When God asks you to let go, he's not trying to take something from you. He's trying to lead you to something greater. The problem is we don't always recognize the upgrade because it doesn't come packaged the way we expect. We assume that if something is from God, it will feel comfortable, look appealing, and arrive on our terms. But divine promotion is often disguised as disruption. It doesn't feel like a step up, it feels like a step back. Yet, in God's economy, elevation begins with obedience, not with understanding. Letting go is the bridge between where you are and where God wants to take you. It's the space between the familiar and the fulfilled. And if you're unwilling to release what's in your hand, you'll forfeit what he's trying to place in your future. Too many people miss the move of God because they refuse to move. They want the blessing, but not the breaking. They want the increase, but not the inconvenience. But in God's process, surrender always precedes supply. Obedience always precedes overflow. Look at the story of Peter. When Jesus asked him to leave his boat, the very thing he relied on for his identity and livelihood. The boat represented security, provision, and control. But when Jesus called him to follow, Peter had to make a decision: keep the boat and miss the blessing, or release it and step into destiny. He chose to let go. And what followed was a life of divine purpose, power, and impact that far exceeded anything he could have imagined while holding on to a fishing net. God rarely calls you to let go of something unless he's making room for something better. But the better he's preparing is often invisible at first. That's why faith is essential. It's what keeps you moving when the next step isn't clear. Letting go feels risky, especially when what you're releasing still looks functional. You might still be getting paid at that job, still receiving attention in that relationship, still achieving results with that mindset. But just because something still works doesn't mean it's still right. God knows when a season is finished, even if you don't. And he will begin to stir your spirit, agitate your comfort, and close doors, not to punish you, but to protect your future. The longer you hold on to what God has outgrown in your life, the more it costs you. What once was a blessing can become a burden when you keep it past its expiration date. It might not be sinful, but it can still be a weight. And the more weight you carry, the harder it becomes to run your race. Hebrews 12:1 tells us to lay aside every weight and sin that so easily entangles us. That means some things in your life are not necessarily wrong, they're just heavy. And anything that slows you down spiritually, emotionally, or mentally is not worth the sacrifice of what God is calling you into. Letting go is not about giving up, it's about growing up. It's about maturing to a place where you trust the giver more than the gift, where you recognize that holding on to what you can see may be costing you what God is trying to reveal. There are doors you can't walk through until you put some things down. There are levels you'll never reach until you empty your hands. You don't climb higher by carrying more. You climb by releasing what's unnecessary. God operates in patterns. He takes us from faith to faith, from glory to glory. But each elevation requires a new level of trust. And trust is tested at the point of release. Will you let go when he says let go? Will you walk away from comfort when he says move? Will you trust that he has something greater even when you don't yet see it? These are the questions that define your spiritual growth. Because you can't grow in faith and stay in control at the same time. Faith demands surrender. So when God nudges your heart, when he whispers, it's time to let it go. Understand that he's not trying to harm you. He's inviting you into something higher, something deeper, something more aligned with his purpose for your life. And while it may be painful in the moment, the reward of obedience far outweighs the cost of release. You may not see it right away. It may not come quickly, but God is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. And part of seeking him is trusting his timing, his process, and his plan. Sometimes the greatest breakthroughs begin not with a big leap, but with a simple act of release. One decision to let go. One moment of surrender. One quiet yes to God's leading. And that one act can open the door to a future you never could have orchestrated on your own. So don't fear the letting go. Embrace it. Because what God has next is always greater than what you're afraid to leave behind. Sometimes what we're holding on to isn't something tangible. It's not a person, a job, or a place. It's an emotion, a wound, a betrayal, a memory. It's something deep inside of us that we've carried for so long, we don't even realize it's weighing us down. We've built our identity around it, structured our decisions to avoid triggering it, and allowed it to shape the way we view ourselves, others, and even God. But when God says let go, he's not just speaking to our outer world. He's speaking to the pain buried in our inner world. And he knows that until we release it, we will never walk in the freedom he intends for us. Holding on to pain may seem like a passive thing, but in reality, it requires energy. It takes mental space. It clutters your spiritual vision. It distorts your perception of God's truth. That bitterness you thought you buried, it shows up in how you treat people who remind you of your past. That unforgiveness you never dealt with, it leaks out in your inability to trust. That shame you tried to ignore, it becomes a filter over every opportunity, whispering, you're not worthy. Emotional baggage, if left unchecked, becomes spiritual bondage. And here's the danger. You can be walking with God, going to church, serving, even praying, and still be shackled by the past. Because proximity to God doesn't guarantee transformation. Surrender does. God doesn't want to just walk with you through your pain. He wants to heal it. But healing begins where honesty begins. You can't be healed from what you refuse to confront. Letting go requires that you look inward and ask yourself, what am I still holding on to that God already forgave, already removed, already delivered me from? There's a story in the Gospels where Jesus approaches a man who had been sick for 38 years. He asks him a strange question, do you want to be made well? On the surface, it seems obvious, of course he does. But Jesus wasn't just asking about his physical condition. He was addressing his will, his desire, his readiness. Because healing is a choice. Letting go of pain, of offense, of brokenness is not just a miracle, it's an act of the will. Some people have lived with their wounds for so long that the idea of wholeness feels foreign. And sometimes staying in pain feels safer than the vulnerability healing requires. But the truth is, you cannot carry old pain into new purpose. God won't bless bitterness. He won't promote you while you're still poisoning your perspective. The promised land is reserved for those who are free from Egypt, free from past thinking, free from inner chains. And many never enter into their calling, not because of the external obstacles, but because they never let go of the internal one. Their hearts are still tethered to offenses that happened years ago. Their minds are still stuck in conversations that wounded them. Their souls are still bleeding from battles they never acknowledged. Letting go of inner pain doesn't mean you're pretending it didn't happen. It doesn't mean you're excusing the wrong that was done to you. It means you're choosing not to let it define you anymore. You're releasing your right to carry anger so that you can receive peace. You're surrendering your desire for vengeance so that God can execute justice his way. You're laying down your sorrow so that joy can have a place to rise. It's a divine exchange. Your burden for his blessing, your trauma for his truth. And this kind of release is not a one-time event. It's a daily decision. Every time that old wound tries to rise back up, you have to remind yourself, I've let that go. I've surrendered that to God. I refuse to carry what he already carried to the cross. You don't have to rehearse the hurt. You don't have to replay the offense. You don't have to live under the shadow of your past. You are freed not because you feel it, but because by faith you've released it. Letting go is one of the most courageous things you can do. It's not weak, it's warfare. You are breaking spiritual strongholds, generational patterns, and emotional chains when you decide to forgive, to heal, to move forward. The enemy would love nothing more than for you to stay stuck in a prison of resentment and regret. But God has more. He has healing. He has restoration. He has joy. But he cannot pour it into a vessel full of bitterness. You have a choice to make. Carry your pain or carry your purpose. but you can't carry both. The weight of what was will always hinder the call of what is. God is ready to take you further, to show you more, to use you in ways that will leave you in awe. But he's waiting for you to let go, not just of the external, but of the internal. Because when your soul is finally free, your destiny can finally begin. There's something powerful about stillness. In a world that celebrates hustle, movement, and constant productivity, stillness can feel unnatural, even uncomfortable. But when God calls you to let go, he often follows that instruction with silence. Not because he's ignoring you, but because he's teaching you to trust him in the absence of answers. It's in the quiet spaces that your faith is refined. It's in the moments when you don't know what's next that God is building your spiritual muscles. Letting go isn't just an action, it's a posture of trust that says, even when I don't see what's ahead, I believe God is already there. This is where many believers get frustrated. We want immediate feedback from heaven. We want to let go of something one day and see a new door open the next. But God's timetable doesn't operate on our impatience. He's not in a rush because he knows what he's doing. And when he tells you to release something, he's not just rearranging your circumstances. He's reshaping your character. The waiting is part of the work. It's in the stillness that he reveals what your heart really believes. Do you trust him only when he speaks? Or do you trust him because he's already spoken? Letting go and stepping into stillness is a test of trust. It requires you to walk without all the details, to move without all the instructions, and to rest in the fact that if God brought you this far, he won't leave you now. And yes, the silence may stretch, the uncertainty may grow, but just because you can't hear him doesn't mean he's not working. Silence is not absence. Hiddenness is not abandoned. God is often most active when he appears most quiet. Think about Abraham. God told him to leave his country, his people, and his father's house, and go to a land he would show him. Notice the wording, go. To a land I will show you. Not go to this address, not here's a detailed map. Just go, move, obey. Abraham had to let go of familiarity and step into mystery. And in doing so, he positioned himself for a blessing so big it would impact generations. But it all started with a decision to walk with God into the unknown. That's what letting go looks like. Trusting God enough to move even when the path isn't lit up. Sometimes God will strip things away, not to hurt you, but to quiet your world. Because only in the quiet can he reveal what you need to hear. If you're constantly busy, surrounded by noise, or distracted by lesser things, you won't be able to discern the still, small voice of God. And he's not going to compete with the chaos you choose. Letting go makes space, not just for new blessings, but for divine clarity. God does his best work in the still places. The stillness is where you learn the difference between movement and momentum. Just because you're busy doesn't mean you're making progress. Some of the greatest forward motion in your life will come when you're sitting still in God's presence. When you're no longer trying to make things happen in your strength, but are resting in his sovereignty. That's when you begin to hear with spiritual ears. That's when your heart is sensitive enough to receive divine strategy. That's when your soul starts aligning with his rhythm, not the world's. And yes, it can feel vulnerable to sit in the silence, to say, Lord, I've let it go, now what? And hear nothing in response. But that's the proving ground of trust. Can you worship when there's no answer? Can you stay faithful when there's no sign? Can you keep obeying when the results are delayed? That's where God sees what's really in you. And if you can remain faithful in the stillness, he will reveal in due time what the silence was preparing you for. Stillness is not inactivity, it's intentional surrender. It's choosing to wait on God rather than force your way forward. It's believing that he is doing more in your waiting than you could ever do in your striving. Letting go means you're relinquishing the illusion of control and choosing rest over restlessness. Because rest is a declaration of trust. It's saying, God, I believe you're working even when I can't see it, feel it, or prove it. And while the world may mock stillness and applaud frantic effort, heaven honors those who wait. Isaiah 40:31 says, they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. Not those who rush, not those who panic, those who wait. Stillness is not passive, it's powerful. It means you've silenced every other voice so that you can hear the one that matters most. So don't rush to fill the silence. Don't panic in the pause. Just because it's quiet doesn't mean you're stuck. You're being still so that you can be strengthened. And when the time is right, God will speak again. And when he does, you'll be ready because you let go and you waited in faith. When God tells you to let go, he is inviting you to step into a deeper level of faith. Faith that is not dependent on what you see, feel, or understand, but faith that trusts in his character and his promises. This kind of faith is not passive, it's active and bold. It requires you to believe in the unseen, to walk by faith and not by sight, even when the path ahead is unclear or frightening. Letting go demands that you surrender your need for control and certainty and embrace a trust so strong that you can release your grip on what is familiar and step into the unknown with confidence that God's hand is guiding you. This is faith in its purest form, a confident assurance in God's goodness and faithfulness, even when your circumstances say otherwise. It's the faith that Abraham had when God told him to leave everything behind and go to a place he did not know. It's the faith that the woman with the issue of blood demonstrated when she reached out to touch Jesus' garment, believing that she would be healed. It's the faith that countless heroes of Scripture displayed as they faced giants, crossed deserts, and stood firm amid storms. Letting go is an act of faith that acknowledges that God is greater than your fears, bigger than your past, and more powerful than your present struggles. Letting go is also a declaration that God's plan is better than your plan. It's saying, Lord, I may not understand why you're asking me to release this, but I trust that you know what's best. This level of surrender is difficult because it requires humility, the humility to admit that your understanding is limited and that God's wisdom surpasses yours. It means acknowledging that what you thought was good, comfortable, or safe may not be what God intends for your highest good. And it means having the courage to obey even when the reward is not immediately visible. Faith doesn't always come easy. Sometimes it's tested by delay, by disappointment, by unanswered questions. You may have prayed for clarity, for peace, for a sign, and yet the silence lingers. But the absence of immediate answers is not evidence of God's absence. It's an invitation to deepen your trust. Letting go is not about giving up hope. It's about anchoring your hope in God's promises instead of your circumstance. It's about believing that God's timing is perfect even when it doesn't match your timeline. Moreover, faith in letting go transforms your perspective. It shifts your focus from what you're losing to what you're gaining. Instead of fixating on the pain of release, you begin to see the potential for new beginnings, fresh opportunities, and divine breakthroughs. You recognize that God is making space in your life, not to leave you empty, but to fill you with his presence, purpose, and provision. Faith allows you to see beyond the temporary loss to the eternal gain. The journey of letting go is a spiritual battle as well. The enemy seeks to exploit your fears and doubts, tempting you to hold on tighter out of insecurity or unbelief. But faith is the weapon that breaks the chains of fear and frees you to move forward. When you choose to trust God fully, you disarm the lies that say you won't survive the release, or that what's ahead won't be enough. Faith silences the voice of fear and amplifies the voice of God, reminding you that he who began a good work in you will carry it to completion. Faith also invites you into a partnership with God. It's not a solo journey, but a co-laboring with the Creator who promises to never leave nor forsake you. When you let go, you're not stepping into the unknown alone. You're stepping into the arms of a God who holds your future. This partnership brings peace amid uncertainty, strength amid weakness, and joy amid sorrow. Faith empowers you to move forward with boldness, knowing that God's grace is sufficient for every step. Letting go in faith also encourages perseverance. The road after release may not be easy. There may be moments of doubt, fear, or temptation to return to old ways. But faith sustains you. It reminds you that every season has its purpose and that the challenges you face are refining you for greater things. Faith holds you steady when the waves rise, and it pushes you onward when the path is steep. It is the foundation upon which your new beginning is built. Ultimately, faith transforms letting go from an ending into a beginning. It turns loss into opportunity, fear into courage, and uncertainty into hope. It is the seed from which every miracle grows. When God says, let go, he is calling you to trust him with your whole heart, to believe that his plans for you are good, that his love is unfailing, and that his promises are true. And when you choose faith, you open yourself to a life marked not by fear, but by freedom. Not by limitation, but by limitless possibility.